The chapel bells that echoed through the stone corridors of the Alcázar of Segovia were a call to order, a daily reminder that in the year 1491, the soul was paramount and the body was merely its temporary, flawed vessel. For a lady in waiting to Queen Isabella I of Castile, the sound was a command. Her bare feet meeting the cold marble, she moved through halls heavy with the scent of incense, carrying a basin of rosewater and fresh linen toward the royal chambers. But beneath the holy aroma was something else, something sour and organic that turned the stomach. Outside the heavy oak doors, the Queen's voice could be heard, a relentless river of Latin prayer punctuated by the soft, sinister whisper of rosary beads. Inside, the Queen of Spain knelt before a massive crucifix, wearing the same white linen shift she had donned months earlier when the siege of Granada began. The fabric, once pure as snow, was now a map of her devotion, yellowed with sweat, stained brown from the blood of self-flagellation, and marked with darker patches one dared not contemplate. The smell was a physical presence, a nauseating cocktail of sanctity and decay, and as the servant drew closer, her blood ran cold. Dozens of tiny dark specks moved through the stained folds of the Queen's shift, fleas, living and breeding in the unwashed garment of the most powerful woman in Christendom. This story of Queen Isabella's vow to never change her underwear until the Muslim stronghold of Granada fell is a historical phantom. Modern scholars largely dismiss it as propaganda, a tale designed to either sanctify her as a martyr or vilify her as a fanatic. Yet, its very persistence for over 5 centuries is a key that unlocks a profound truth about her world. To understand why this myth feels so chillingly believable, one must descend into the medieval mind, a place where the line between holiness and horror was impossibly thin, and where dirt was not a sign of poverty but, for some, a badge of divine favor. The Spain of Isabella's time was a land fractured by the Reconquista, the 7-century-long campaign to push Muslim rulers off the Iberian Peninsula. This was not merely a military conflict but a deep cultural schism that shaped the most intimate aspects of life, including the act of bathing. In the Islamic kingdoms of Al-Andalus, cleanliness was a pillar of faith and society. Public bathhouses, or hammams, were architectural marvels dotting every major city, where Muslims performed ritual ablutions before prayer and engaged in social rituals of steaming and scrubbing, their water systems ingeniously preserved from Roman times. In stark contrast, the Christian kingdoms viewed these same baths with deep suspicion and theological dread. Church authorities condemned them as dens of sin, where nakedness and steam broke down social and moral boundaries. More dangerously, bathing was associated with Islam, Judaism, and paganism, the enemies of the true faith. The teachings of early church fathers like St. Jerome, who declared that he who is bathed in Christ has no need of a second bath, had curdled over centuries into a firm belief that washing the body was to wash away the protective layer of baptism, leaving the pores vulnerable to demonic invasion and disease. The truly pious, it was believed, should emulate the martyrs, whose sanctity was often measured in blood, sweat, and sacred suffering. Isabella was born into this world of sanctified filth in 1451. Her childhood in the court of her father, John II of Castile, was a masterclass in survival, marked by civil war and the constant threat of assassination. In such an environment, personal hygiene was a trivial concern compared to political longevity. The royal court itself was a mobile, malodorous city of thousands of nobles, servants, soldiers, horses, and dogs traveling from castle to castle and consuming all resources in its path. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, overflowing chamber pots, and rotting food. A pivotal moment crystallized this worldview for the young Isabella. During the winter of 1468, when she was 17, an outbreak of the Black Death struck the court at the Alcázar of Segovia. She watched as the plague unfolded with terrifying predictability. First the rats, emerging from walls to die in the open, then the fleas, swarming for new hosts, and finally, the humans. Strong men were reduced to whimpering victims, their bodies marked by fever and the characteristic buboes, swollen lymph nodes filled with black, corrupted blood. The court physicians in their beaked masks, stuffed with herbs, were powerless. But what struck Isabella most powerfully was a grim, coincidental pattern. The dirtiest members of the court, the kitchen servants caked in grease. The stable boys who slept with the horses often remained healthy, while the nobles who occasionally washed their hands and faces died in alarming numbers. This observation, though a tragic misreading of correlation for causation, reinforced a growing conviction that would define her reign. Cleanliness was not just unnecessary, but perilous. The faithful, she concluded, should trust in God's protection, not in worldly and potentially sinful remedies like soap and water. If the first part of Isabella's life taught her to distrust the body, the siege of Granada was her ultimate test of that conviction. In April of 1491, the stage was set for the final act of the Reconquista. Rather than a swift assault, Isabella and her husband Ferdinand orchestrated a masterful war of attrition, constructing the purpose-built city of Santa Fe just outside Granada's formidable walls. It was here, amidst the dust and desperation of a military encampment, that the myth of the underwear vow was supposedly lived out. If the tale is true, the physical and psychological toll would have been immense. The Spanish summer was brutally hot, with temperatures soaring over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The air in Santa Fe was a permanent haze of dust, smoke from countless campfires, and the collective odor of thousands of unwashed soldiers. Contemporary accounts describe the Queen during this period as gaunt and hollow-eyed, her face marked by an otherworldly intensity as she spent hours in prayer before a portable altar in her tent. Visitors noted she seemed to emanate a strange odor, not entirely foul, but distinctly organic, like old leather mixed with dried flowers. The psychological mechanisms required to endure such self-imposed squalor were complex. Modern psychiatry might recognize in her reported behavior the visions of saints, the divine voices guiding military strategy, the paranoia about her advisors' signs of religious psychosis, potentially exacerbated by the physiological effects of extreme neglect. In the medieval understanding, however, this was not madness but profound piety. The fleas that infested her clothing were not mere pests, they were miniature demons sent by Satan to test the faithful. Every bite, every moment of agonizing itch, was a spiritual battle fought upon the canvas of her own skin. Enduring it without complaint was evidence of her sanctity. This mindset was rooted in a medieval medical theory that viewed the body as a delicate balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Physicians taught that the body's natural oils and secretions were essential to maintaining this equilibrium, and that washing them away with soap and water opened the pores to cold air and malevolent miasmas, inviting illness and even insanity. In a tragic feedback loop, the skin infections and irritations caused by prolonged uncleanliness were seen as proof of the body's vulnerability when stripped of its protective layers of dirt and sacred secretion. The linen shift itself was central to this ritual of suffering. In the 15th century, linen, derived from the flax plant, was considered a pure, almost magical fabric, the material of angels and burial shrouds. Worn directly against the skin, it was believed to create a spiritual barrier. But this power was thought to grow with use. A fresh garment was spiritually neutral, but one that had absorbed the wearer's sweat, blood, tears, and oils became a charged relic, imbued with their life force and spiritual essence. Isabella's shift, stiff with the accumulated evidence of her devotion, would have been transformed in her eyes from mere clothing into a talisman. It was a physical manifestation of her vow, a contract with God that she believed would ensure victory. To remove it would be to break that sacred bond and risk eternal damnation. This belief system was not unique to the Queen. She was part of a broader Spanish cultural movement that celebrated extreme self-denial. Holy women, or beatas, like Maria de Santo Domingo, famously never washed their hands for 30 years, claiming cleanliness was a sign of spiritual weakness. Another, Catalina de Cardona, was said to have worn the same hair shirt for 40 years until it could stand upright on its own. These women were not outcasts, they were revered. This culture of sanctified filth was brutally enforced by the very institution Isabella had established, the Spanish Inquisition. Founded in 1478 to root out heresy, the Inquisition made personal hygiene a matter of doctrinal suspicion. Those who bathed regularly, changed their clothes frequently, or otherwise exhibited concern for bodily comfort, were often accused of being conversos. Jews or Muslims who had converted to Christianity, but secretly practiced the cleanliness rituals of their ancestral faiths. In this atmosphere, to be dirty was to be a good Christian. To be clean was to risk accusation, torture, and death at the auto da fe. The siege stretched for 8 grueling months, and Isabella's isolation would have grown with her uncleanliness. As her personal state deteriorated, only the most devout servants could have borne to attend to her closely, and even they would have struggled to hide their revulsion. This social separation intensified her mystical tendencies, cutting her off from the moderating influence of mundane human contact and reinforcing her belief that she was on a solitary, divine mission. The world outside her tent was one of military strategy and political calculation, but the world within was a stark drama of soul versus flesh, where the victory was measured not only in territory gained but in suffering endured. The fall of Granada on the 2nd of January 1492 marked the triumphant end of nearly 8 centuries of Reconquista. According to the persistent myth, it was also the moment Isabella I of Castile finally shed the linen shift she had worn without change throughout the long siege. The garment, stiffened into a crusted shell by months of accumulated sweat, blood, and grime, was said to have been capable of standing upright on its own, a grotesque, hollow effigy of the Queen's suffering and devotion. Whether this specific event ever occurred is lost to time, but the symbolism is potent. The conquest of the last Muslim kingdom in Spain and the discarding of the soiled relic represented a dual purification, of the nation from infidel rule, and of the Queen from her self-imposed physical degradation. Yet, the paradox of Isabella's power was that her profound act of self-debasement ultimately served to elevate her authority. In a medieval world steeped in the theatre of monarchy, only a sovereign of unassailable position could afford such a public display of vulnerability. Her willingness to embrace a peasant's squalor was a performance of ultimate piety that separated her from ordinary, comfort-seeking humanity and cemented her image as God's chosen instrument. This dynamic was deeply gendered. As a female ruler in a fiercely patriarchal society, Isabella navigated a precarious political landscape. Her body was a source of potential weakness, a subject of scrutiny, and a vessel for dynastic ambitions. By deliberately making her body repulsive through neglect, she effectively desexualized herself. She transformed a potential liability, her femininity, into a source of spiritual and political power. She was not a queen to be desired, but a queen to be revered and feared, a sovereign who had transcended the vanities and temptations of the flesh to become a living symbol of the state's divine mission. This mission shifted almost immediately after Granada's surrender. Just 8 months later, she and Ferdinand would sponsor Christopher Columbus's voyage, channeling the same religious fervor that had fueled the Reconquista into a new, global crusade. The zeal that might have driven a vow of uncleanliness would now drive the conversion and subjugation of the New World, with consequences that would reshape hemispheres. The medical consequences of such extreme behavior, however, would have been very real. Prolonged wear of unwashed, bacteria-laden linen directly against the skin would have caused severe infections, rashes, and lesions. Some historians have speculated that the reported decline in her health and increasing instability in later years, marked by deep grief over the death of her son and heir, may have been exacerbated by chronic, low-grade infections stemming from such poor hygiene. The body, so long denied and mortified, would have had its final biological say. The enduring power of this myth lies not in its historical veracity, but in what it reveals about our ongoing fascination with the intersection of power, faith, and the human body. The idea that physical suffering leads to spiritual advancement, that the material world is corrupt, and that the body must be conquered, did not die with Isabella. It echoes in modern ascetic practices across various faiths, in the valorization of self-denial, and in our cultural anxiety about the relationship between outward appearance and inner virtue. Ultimately, the story of Isabella's unwashed shift is a window into a world that is almost unimaginable to us today. A world where the most powerful woman in Europe could be celebrated for embracing conditions that would horrify a modern homeless shelter. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable fact that our concepts of cleanliness, health, and sanctity are not universal constants, but are constructed by the specific cultures and beliefs of an era. The Spanish monarchy and the Catholic Church, in crafting Isabella's legacy, wisely emphasized her triumphs, the unification of Spain, the discovery of the Americas, while allowing stranger, more disturbing tales like this one to fade into the footnotes of history. Yet, the myth persists as a ghost in the corridors of the Alhambra, a whisper of a time when the line between devotion and delusion, between the saint and the fanatic, was drawn not by reason or comfort, but by an absolute, terrifying faith. It reminds us that history is not just a record of what happened, but a story of what people believed was possible, and what they were willing to endure for those beliefs. The fleas are long gone, but the human capacity to find profound meaning in profound suffering remains. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the strange and often uncomfortable realities of the past. If you are fascinated by this hidden truth of history, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the forgotten stories that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what other historical myths you'd like us to explore next.